Alright, let me get one thing out of the way. I clickbaited you. This technically isn't a video about Nintendo. Fuck Nintendo. They really aren't important here. What's important is HAL Laboratory. You know, the makers of this little guy right here. With the Kirby series, Nintendo and HAL Laboratory found great success. But what were they like before that? What kind of games did they make? What led up to this? Well, that all comes down to the development, release, and failure of one game, which is what I want to talk about today.
Now, picture this. The year is 1987, and you're Satoru Iwata, a brilliant man who would go on to become the CEO of Nintendo and one of the most legendary figures in the video game industry. But for now, you're just working as lead of development for HAL Laboratory, a small game company that has built a strong relationship with Nintendo thanks to you. With such a great level of trust, HAL can develop games for the Famicom and NES systems. The only problem is coming up with new projects. You see, HAL Laboratory didn't really have a creative team coming up with ideas for games, as they mostly focused on the programming and the hardware, and got ideas from outside the company. You know, like Nintendo. Anyways, back to Iwata. One day, as Iwata, you walk by the workstation of Yoshimiru Hoshi. Yoshimiru, as he's usually referred to, had extremely little experience with video games. He did freelance work at various different places, building Gundam kits for magazines, drawing covers for manga, all sorts of things. He ended up at HAL originally doing the art for both the MSX and Famicom versions of Gal Force, a shmup based on some anime. His work was good enough for HAL to keep him around for the time being. Anyways, back to his workstation. He has a few design documents lying around, and on his monitor is, well, it's one of the most impressive feats of technology you have ever seen. The depicted character had such a great level of detail in both its looks and its animations. It looks straight out of an anime. Yoshimiru was actually preparing to present this to you, but it looks so good, it doesn't need a presentation. You immediately give his project approval along with full creative control. And that is how production of Slader Glory began. Yoshimiru had very big and ambitious plans for the game, wanting to tie in everything he had worked on up to that point. He initially envisioned an adventure game that had branching story paths and alternate endings. When HAL's programmers told him how much of that couldn't be accomplished on the Famicom, he ended up cutting over half the game's script. But once that was figured out, came the actual development of the game, which took over 4 years. Which might seem pretty standard today, but back then, 4 years was enough for entire trilogies to come out. It all came down to the graphics. It took a lot of work for Yoshimiru's drawings to be converted into something that could be read and displayed on the Famicom, due to the color palette and bit limitations. They boosted the power of the game with an MMC5 chip in every cartridge, which was the second most powerful chip he used to expand NES games. And because of that, Slader Glory became the biggest and costliest game on the Famicom. That's right, the base Famicom. A disk system version wasn't even feasible, even if the game were to be distributed on multiple discs. Each one could only hold 128 kilobytes, while Slader Glory was shaping out to be a 1 megabyte game. And despite the fact that the Super Famicom was right around the corner and probably would have fit the game much better, it was already too late. The game was released on August 30th, 1991. For some reason, this was just a day before another game developed and published by HAL called Hyperzone, which, no, it has nothing to do with giant demonic bleeding eyeballs. I was wondering when you were going to ask that. The reception was okay. I mean, Famitsu only gave it a 23 out of 30, but it flew off the shelves. The entire first print sold out, and the second print, well, funny thing about that, there was no second print. HAL ended up pouring so much money into the release of this game that they almost went bankrupt, and Nintendo had to save them to get them back on their feet. After the bankruptcy, HAL Laboratory didn't publish another game for a very, very long time. Why is that the case? Well, do you know the first game Nintendo published from HAL? It was Kirby's Dream Land. It was a huge success for both of them, and they never looked back. Which is a real shame because Yoshimura considered it his life's work. It was supposed to be his magnum opus. He was going to turn it into a huge franchise. Of course, that didn't really happen. But that doesn't necessarily say anything about the game's quality. That just shows that it had the worst of luck. Normally, I would want to get the game in my own hands to show it off, but, well, thankfully, this just so happens to be one of the few Famicom text-based adventure games to have a fan translation, released on the 27th anniversary of the game's release. Well, now it's a must-play.
Alright, I'm gonna say it now. This game is a bitch to emulate. I tried playing it on my NES Classic a while back, and it was riddled with technical issues. The sound wouldn't work, there were tons of graphical glitches, the screen was weirdly cropped, sometimes it just wouldn't even load. But I eventually got it working. So while this isn't my first playthrough of the game, I'll be treating it as if it was. And yes, I will be going through the whole game. So if you want to experience it yourself, spoiler warning from here on out. Well, without further ado, let's dive right in.
So, starting out this game, we're introduced to 4 things. The 3 main protagonists, and the crazy graphics they shoved in here. Alright, if I saw this in 1987, I also would have immediately approved of it, because this just looks amazing. Sure, you can see where the color palette has its limits, but this artwork, the level of detail, how the characters move and talk, it's truly beyond anything I'd ever imagined to be possible on this hardware. I'll point things out as we go, but just know that from a graphical aspect, Yoshimura truly didn't miss. The story of this game actually starts off in the instruction manual, where they wrote out an entire manga chapter taking place a day before the start of the game, and it's fully translated into English. I think this is something more fan translators should do, as it preserves much more than just the game. It preserves elements surrounding the game. Anyway, speaking of the manual itself, it definitely sets the tone for the rest of the game. So we start off with the main character, Tadashi, who is hang on, I gotta prepare for this. Metal Slader Operator, which are these giant mechs. You buy one off of your friend expecting it to be a worker mech, but it actually turns out to be a battle mech. It starts blaring messages about the Earth being in danger, so Tadashi goes off with his little sister Azusa and his friend Alina to find out all they can about the Slader. These are the 3 main leads that we see throughout the story, and they play off of each other pretty well, but they are a bit weak on their own. Tadashi is the player-controlled character, which means the way you perceive his character is based on how you play the game. And depending on how you play, well, let's talk about this later. Alina acts as the voice of reason for Tadashi, and usually keeps him in check. She doesn't have a lot of her own identity, but like I said before, she plays off of Tadashi pretty well. Azusa is the young, bubbly, and annoying little sister. The game says that she's 12, but she's written like she's 9. And she tags along with us because, well, we can't really complain about this to our parents. They're both dead. A lot of this is established in the beginning part of the game, where you're just walking down the street waiting for your friend Jen to open up his shop. This section is really nice because you can just take in the ocean sounds, take in all the scenery, and learn about these characters. This is probably the most colorful the game gets, as the rest of the game is in space. So, they really make you take your time with this.
So, overall, the game is very linear. After this section, you talk to Jen's wife for a bit before Jen himself comes back. He tells you he gets all of his goods from off-planet, and he promises to take us to the airport to investigate the Slader. This gives us an amazing scene where we're driving along the ocean. You see this sprite of them in the car towing the Slader? It goes way off screen. You can really tell they're pushing the limits of the Famicom, but they mostly shove it all here in the beginning. Like, once we launch off into space, we have this really cool animation while the opening credits play. And there's nothing else quite like that until the ending. The game doesn't stop having impressive scenes, but they definitely want to
leave a good first impression. So we get to the station where Jen's ship is. We're going to be borrowing it to take it across the space colonies. But for now, we're just going to go around this one to see what we can shake out of the information desk and the mechanics. And... okay! There's a reason I saved talking about the playable character for last, because Tadashi is quite possibly the horniest protagonist out of any Nintendo game. There are a lot of female characters in this game, and I mean a lot of female characters. And Tadashi has unique, flirty, and sometimes very suggestive dialogue with every single female character in the game. Sometimes it can be funny, but sometimes I just want more information out of a character, and Tadashi's asking for her feet measurements. Jesus. But it's mostly optional. Like, I could run down these mechanic girls, but you don't need to. Oh, something interesting about this scene is the mech they're working on is actually a reference to Iwata himself. I think this is one of the very first times his name has shown up in a video game, so this is really cool. Getting back to the story, the only things we have to go off of are a supposed serial number and a floppy disk. Of course no one can help us read it, it's 2062, no one has a Famicom. But, from the serial number, we learned that the Slader was piloted by Tadashi's dad, which means he was using the warp from 8 years back. Apparently, Azusa was with him in his final moments, and she suppressed the memory of watching her father die for 8 years now. That's definitely gotta take a toll on anyone's mental health. You know, that's a very interesting direction to take a character like this. It's not something you would see in video games, especially during this era. I guess Azusa isn't as innocent as I said. Maybe her happy, bubbly nature is just a facade. Maybe... Oh, I'm sorry to pause here, but were you just getting emotionally invested in this character? Well, I'm gonna have to stop you right there, because this next scene happens less than a minute later. Okay, so next we're gonna call 911 and turn ourselves in. Nah. We're actually gonna try and learn more about the conflict from 8 years ago. The colony supervisor says it was a simple rebellion, and that there are no records of it. Sure. Honestly, it's kinda hard to talk about the beginning hours of this game. There's a lot of going back and forth, talking to characters, and when talking to other characters in the game, there really isn't much to say, outside of whatever dirty talking Tadashi goes through with them. But one thing I should point out is the voices. And no, they're not speaking lines. There's no way they could have showed voice acting in here. But each character has a pitched noise to resemble a unique voice. This is also in games like the Mario and Luigi series, but I think this is one of the first games to do it. And when I say every character has a unique voice, I do mean it. Several characters will be having conversation, and you can distinguish between all of them. You know, I think I'll just let Anakin Skywalker explain it to you.
And not just the men and the men, but the women and the men, and the women and the women, and the children too.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive. And hey, if you get sick of it, or you think the text is too slow, you can hold the B button to speed up the text. Sort of a given thing nowadays, but in 1991, revolutionary. But if you have the opposite problem, and think it's not slow enough, you can pause the game and play the game in super slow motion for some reason. Okay, what's the point of this? Do they expect my eyes to be running Internet Explorer? Well, I guess they're not wrong to assume. So going to another station supervisor, we find out nothing. Not even her feet measurements. Son of a... But going to the lead mechanic, he tells us our mech must be a replica of Glory. Metal Slader Glory, if you will. Glory in itself was a prototype, which explains the weird serial number. You see, a Slader's serial number is usually labeled by the manufacturer and a string of numbers. But prototypes are instead followed by the intended pilot's initials. In this case, Tadashi's dad, as stated before. The main manufacturer of Sladers was the ISDC company on the moon, so might as well go there for more leads. Whenever you're about to travel through space, Elena will ask you if you want to take a nap. This is basically the game's way of letting you save, which unfortunately is done through a password system. But the passwords are very simple. They're like names and phrases and stuff. During space travel, the characters themselves will reflect on what's going on, and I really like this. It keeps the player caught up if they haven't played in a while, and the dark color palette combined with the music is really relaxing. When it comes to music throughout the game in general, there are a lot of times where it just takes a back seat, and you get a taste of the environmental sounds, like in the beginning when you hear the ocean waves crashing on the rocks. Or like before you take off in a ship, and you just hear the beeping and whirring of machines and computers. When music does play though, it's pretty good. They go for a Super Mario World method of taking the same melody and changing it to fit the tone. I don't know if it's really a leitmotif thing, as the melody itself isn't associated with any particular character or setting or idea. So Mario World is the best comparison. So we get to the moon and, well, first off I want to say this moon scene is really cool. They're able to get a lot of detail out of a few colors, and you can still see hints of color where it should be, like around the Zeus's dress. Anyway, the receptionist here tells us that the mechanic who worked on Glory was,
Vivace.
It must be Italian or something. Only one problem. He's missing. It's at this point where you have no idea what to do, where to go, anything like that. They let you wander around to every colony and find nothing every time. So what do you have to do to progress? Get this. You have to ask the moon receptionist out on a date, which pisses off Elena so much that she makes you take her out for dessert in place of the receptionist. So why do you have to do this? Well, the first time you talk to the receptionist, she asks you to wait to pull up the information, and everyone's hungry, so you all go out for dinner at this nearby place called Vivace's. You don't know Vivace's name the first time you go to the restaurant, so apparently it just all lines up when you go the second time. So we ask the waiter about it, and I'm not gonna lie, this is kinda dumb. You have to wait till your waitress visibly comes on screen, and it takes forever. Once you bring up the connection to Vivace, the Slader manufacturer, she starts getting worried and sends you to the colony Jen got the Slader from. And on the way there, everyone kinda splits off and does their own thing, while Tadashi is left to think about everything that's happened so far. Oh, let me rephrase it. Tadashi has to think about everything that's happened so far. You can't move on unless you've exhausted every option given here. Once you do, however, you hear something crash into the ship, so you go to investigate. And by investigate, I mean watch Alina shower. Anyway, we find Azusa talking to some kid who seems to have sucking onto the— Oh shit, it's an alien! And I died. Yeah, you can actually die in this game. It's never too much of a penalty. You just wake up at the last point where Elena would have told you to take a nap. It's fine though, I'm not going to complain, but now Azusa's been kidnapped by the aliens. It's at this point where the story starts going crazy. And it's where it seems like Yoshimiru was still trying to implement branching story paths into the game. They don't really amount to anything though, you still get the same ending at the end of the day. So once you go to the colony, you have the option to either go to the place on the waitress's map, or to file a missing persons report with the colony supervisor's secretary. Either way, she'll find you at the place to tell you where Azusa has been found, which is pretty Going to the place marked on the map, it's a fast food restaurant. And why is the sky blue? We're in space, there is no sky. Do they paint the walls of the colonies? This is on the edge, right? I don't know, this is all just really weird. It seems like something that would be posted on the liminal spaces page, if you know what I mean. So we're supposed to figure out that the initials of this place align with the initials of our father, but I mean, come on, McBerries. They're kind of stretching it by making us consider hamburgers in the title. Anyways, convincing the workers here that we're important, they show us that this is actually Vivace's secret base, full of Sladers. That's crazy. Imagine if a McDonald's had an entrance to Area 51. Like, you're sitting there thinking about if you want a Big Mac, while the cashier just got back from clapping some alien cheek. This has been Vivace's base of operations for years, and Caddy and Enkai here have been continuing his research since his absence. Alright, before things get too serious, the statue at Vivace's restaurant on the moon is Vivace himself, which are partly mistaken for Colonel Sanders. You know, the KFC Colonel Sanders. Apparently Japan has this weird idolization of KFC and Colonel Sanders. It was all part of this huge marketing push in the 70s for KFC and Christmas. All the KFCs in the country have a statue of the man out in front, and they decorate it for stuff like, of course, Christmas as Santa and other events throughout the year. And apparently, during a baseball celebration, one was thrown into the river and the team's been cursed ever since. But I'm getting way too off track. We're supposed to be talking about aliens here. So everything the supervisors have been telling us about rebellions and stuff, that's all bullshit. 8 years ago was an alien invasion, and while the humans were able to fend them off, using shapeshifting, they managed to work their way into society and apparently control the government, silencing anyone who knows about the truth, including Vivace. With this information heavy on us, the secretary finds us outside the restaurant, like I said before, and she tells us that Azusa has been found at an abandoned colony. It's here where, again, it seems like Yoshimiru was still trying to implement branching paths in the game. But realistically, there's still only one path to go down. You see, you could go to the abandoned colony now and get fucked up by the aliens that await you. Or you can go and convince Caddy to come with you and bring guns, so that you can fuck up the aliens instead. Guess which one's the right option? However, if you go into the debug mode, you can access this area and save Azusa without Caddy and her guns. Then again, you do need to kill the alien that was disguised as a colony supervisor, because he has a key card that will open the door that Azusa is behind. So they probably couldn't come up with a way for you to get a key card off of him without having to kill him. Anyways, I love this section in the abandoned colony. It's just so tense with the red emergency lighting and how you really don't know if an alien is right around the corner. Almost literally, as you have to walk through the colony yourself and go between the floors and check all the rooms to find Azusa. When it comes to this section of the game, a lot of people draw comparisons to another Famicom text-based adventure game called Jesus Kyofu no Biomonster by Enix, which also has a fan translation, so you can play that too, if you want to, I guess. It's nowhere near as good as Metal Slader Glory. Whereas exploring this alien-infested space colony is just one section of Metal Slayer Glory, it's the entire game of Jesus Kyofu no Biomonster. And when you run into the alien, it's super lame. Like, this is the thing that killed everyone on the ship? While you can gun it down, you need the right gun and the right bullet, and why would you even bother though? Because you can just investigate anything and everything you want to in the room, and it just won't attack you. It's dumb. So anyways, we eventually find Azusa hiding an event, and we haul ass out of here. Getting back to the colony, and it's a fucking wreck. There's fire and explosions everywhere, everyone's gone, all the Sladers in the base have been taken. But it's fine, because everyone's been taken to a secret ship on the other side of the colony, called the T-Stork. Dumb name. So it turns out this station supervisor has been in on Vivaci's research on the aliens, so she's been keeping tabs on the government and has a militia of Slader pilots at the ready. Even then, only a small select group of people know about all this happening, which means there must be an alien amidst us that learned about the base and ratted us out. And yes, it is that obvious. It's at this moment when Azusa wakes up from her nap. She now remembers everything about when her father died. But her coming out is what gets the secretary to actually reveal that she is, in fact, an alien. So, I skipped a few details along the way, and one of them is the fact that Tadashi and Alina's mother made perfume. She even made a special bottle for Tadashi and Azusa to keep before she died. Well, it turns out the aliens hate the perfume. Glory is laced with the stuff, which has kept the aliens away from it. Once the alien is revealed, it goes back to its mothership, which appears in the distance and destroys the colony. Looks like it's time for the final battle to begin, and I gotta say, this is one of the coolest moments in the game. It's also one of the most epileptic moments in the game. A lot of old games have flashing lights and stuff that are not easy on the eyes at all, but this game goes too fucking far in this final battle. There are two moments where both ships fire off massive lasers, and the entire screen just flashes black and white for every frame. This shit puts the cancelled Pokemon episode to shame.
Well, it's a good thing I came prepared.
Aside from that, the final battle is still cool. You get to control Metal Slader Glory itself in this time-based combat system. You have to use the right weapons to counter the right projectiles from the aliens, or else you'll get fucked. But these animations are so cool, like, look at me go! Oh. Anyway, once you do make it to the mothership, it starts charging up its mega laser again. So you're going alone to fire off Glory's ultimate weapon, which was stored on a floppy disk that Caddy gave you earlier. Well, we better put it in before it's too late. What the fuck? Well, we run into kind of a problem. It requires voice recognition. But we're able to make it through with pure luck and coincidence. You see, 8 years ago when Tadashi and Azusa's dad was dying, he was actually recording Azusa's voice onto a floppy disk while registering it into the recognition unit. This is actually what's on the floppy disk we found earlier in the game. Azusa accidentally overwrote the recording when we were trying to look at it earlier, but since it just recorded over her own voice, there's no consequence. As the ultimate weapon fires off at the exact right moment, the mothership blows to pieces, and we save the day. Roll credits.
So yeah, that was Slader Glory. At times, it really was something for the eyes, and at other times, well. But overall, I'd say it was pretty good. It's unfortunate that certain circumstances didn't allow this game to become the success that Yoshimiru or HAL Laboratory wanted out of it, but this isn't where the story ends.
Despite the failure of this game, Yoshimiru had several attempts to keep the series going. For starters, a prequel was actually planned for a release on the 64DD. Yes, that 64DD. The same 64DD that was supposed to be an add-on for the Nintendo 64 that was supposed to make up for the lack of CD support on the base 64, which is what allowed the PlayStation to dominate the market. The same 64DD that was announced before the 64 even released and never even made it outside of Japan despite being shown off in American events like E3 for almost the entire system's life. The same 64DD that could only be ordered through mail subscription, and because that only sold 15,000 units, had 10 games and 60 planned and cancelled games, including Metal Slayer Glory 64. Like many other cancelled 64DD games, however, it was reworked into a different game on a different console, that being Metal Slayer Glory Director's Cut for the Super Famicom. This was actually the very last game released for the system on November 29th, 2000. That is incredible. They're almost the exact same game. Of course, the graphics look better, but also the music is completely different. You see, the music from the original game was licensed from some outside company, so they couldn't use it for the director's cut. Now, despite the changes that had to be done through the music, both versions of Metal Slayer Glory, the original and the SNES version, were re-released on Wii and Wii U Virtual Console. Not the 3DS though, fuck me I guess. And for some reason, only the original version has been fan-translated, twice. That doesn't mean you can't play the game, since they're basically the same. All you need to do is open up an NES emulator, open up an SNES emulator, open the two games, allow for background inputs, and voila! Yeah, the worst way to play an untranslated version of a translated game. It could be worse, at least the game isn't bad. All this failure and stuff doesn't mean the series has no fans. In fact, Metal Slayer Glory has gained quite the cult following in Japan. And the person at the forefront of all these fans is, well, Yoshimiya himself. He never stopped with Director's Cut. He has continued to support the series through official art, toys, books detailing the development of the games, a drama CD, even Gundam kits for Metal Slayer Glory itself. It's kind of like things have come full circle. I guess in a way you could say Metal Slayer Glory is still Yoshimiya's magnum opus, and it's still at the forefront of his career. He's definitely open to making a new game in the series and bringing it officially to the West, but I don't think that's up to him. The Virtual Console re-releases were done without his involvement, so HAL probably owns the IP in terms of like distributing the games and stuff. And it's very unlikely Nintendo would publish something so risque ever again. I guess HAL Laboratory would rather make games about true unimaginable horrors that keep people up at night, like not being able to kiss your homies.
Alright, I'm losing the fucking blindfold. Fuck this. Well, that's about it for me. Thanks for watching, guys. I know some of you have been hearing about me making a video, and I'm sorry that I've put it off for so long. You know, there's just been a lot of things going on, from various personal things that I can't talk about online to other various personal things that I can't talk about online. You get the picture. So that begs the question, will I be doing anything more like this? I don't know.